going to look at Matthew chapter 16 this morning. So we're going to put it on the screen. But in future weeks, if you want to bring a Bible to Youth Church, you are very, very welcome to. You don't have to, obviously. And if you've got a Bible on your phone, you can get the Bible out on your app on your phone. Pre-COVID, of course, we had like a box of Bibles and we just throw them out in the middle and everyone could just grab one if they didn't have one. But we're not allowed to do that, sadly. But it's not the saddest thing that we're not allowed to do, I suppose. The saddest thing is like not having donuts and stuff. But it's still sad. Anyway, so we're going to look at Matthew chapter 16, verses 13 to 19. And I'm going to read it. It says this: When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say..." Oh, I've just remembered something. Michelle, did we hit record? Okay, good. That's now on the recording, but that's fine. Emma, did we hit record? Yeah, all right. There we go. So for those watching at home, we just wanted to check that you didn't miss that, 2 minutes before this. But we have, in fact, hit record. This is now on the recording, and we're going to keep going. We're reading Matthew chapter 16, verses 13 to 19. It says this: When Jesus came to the region... When Jesus came... That's all on the recording too. There you go. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked the disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others, Jeremiah or one of the prophets. But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." I've got a question for you. I wonder who your favorite superhero secret identity is. So I'm not talking about your favorite superhero, but your favorite superhero secret identity. So for example, like Superman, his secret identity is Clark Kent, yeah? And Batman, his super identity is Bruce Wayne, right? Following? Any suggestions? Favorite superhero secret identity? You can shout them out. Yes. Say it again. Spider-Man, which is? Okay, it's Peter Parker, right? Peter Parker. Any others? Any other favorite superhero secret identities? And why? Yes. The Dark Knight? Yes, Batman's, because basically he's just got lots of money, hasn't he? Like his real life is pretty sweet, as well as his superhero life being pretty sweet. Yeah, that's a good one. Any other wonders? Any other favorite secret hero? Yes. Yeah, Dash. Is it Dash? Yeah. Yeah, the boy from The Incredibles. Yeah, that's a good one. My favorite, I'll tell you, is Peter Parker, okay, who is Spider-Man. The reason is, how smart is this? Peter Parker's day job is to take photos of Spider-Man. He works for a newspaper and he makes money by taking photos of Spider-Man, who is in fact himself. That's just a get-rich-quick scheme waiting to happen. How good is that your actual secret identity helps you with your superhero thing? Anyway, the passage we're looking at today is all about identity. It's all about identity. So Jesus starts off, he opens up this passage by saying to his disciples, "Who do the people say that I am?" And he's basically saying to them, guys, you hear what the people are saying. You hear all the gossip. What are they saying about me? What are they saying? What are the theories? And the disciples give three options. The first thing they say is, some say you are John the Baptist. And the reason behind this, conspiracy theories seem to be getting more and more every year, right? Every year we seem to get a new couple of conspiracy theories that everyone's talking about. And this is kind of what's happening with Jesus, right? So the first theory is that he's John the Baptist. Just a few chapters before in Matthew, we see that John the Baptist gets beheaded. And so there was this theory that Jesus was a continuation of the work of John the Baptist. Now that John the Baptist's gone, Jesus is the next John the Baptist, right? He's this continuation. The second theory, the second thing that they say is Elijah. So Elijah was one of the prophets, but he didn't die. Instead, he was kind of like taken up in this cloud of smoke. And it was believed that he would return one day to point the way to the Messiah. So there's this other theory that he was like Elijah in the sense that Jesus was this signpost, this person that was going to point to the Messiah. And the third theory that he was just Jeremiah or one of the prophets is how the disciples kind of say it, right? So he was just like some guy. Like he wasn't particularly anything special. He was just one of many prophets. No real significance. He was just some guy. So a continuation or a signpost or just some guy. They all had their theories. Everyone had an opinion about who Jesus was. Even the Pharisees, Jesus' enemies, had an opinion about who Jesus was. It was so clear that God was at work through Jesus. C.S. Lewis, the author of the Narnia Chronicles, says this: Christianity, if false, is of no importance. If true, is of infinite importance. The only thing it cannot be is moderately important. Everybody had an opinion of who they thought Jesus was. The real thing facing us is that we cannot be indifferent about the person of Jesus. And so then you see this conversation shift with the disciples, right? Jesus, he turns to them and he says, but what about you? Who do you guys say that I am? Who do you say that I am? This is the question that is really concerns Jesus. This is the question he really wants to know the answer to. I wonder how you would answer that question. I wonder if you were to answer that question today, who do you say that I am? How would you respond to Jesus? And my follow-up question for us here today, for you guys, is how has your answer shifted over time? That question of who do you say that Jesus is, how has your answer shifted over time? Maybe you're still quite new to all of this stuff. Maybe you're still journeying and trying to figure out what the heck we're doing here today. Maybe this is all new to you. Or maybe you've been around church for a very long time. Maybe you've been dragged to church since you were very, very small, and you've always known who Jesus was. But how has your answer to that question shifted over time? For the disciples, this is a pivotal moment. They have been following Jesus for a little while now. They have seen some incredible things that Jesus has done. But this moment is a pivotal moment. And we see that Simon Peter is the one that pipes up for the whole group, right? Simon Peter is the one that kind of answers Jesus' direct question. And we're going to hone in a little bit on the character of Simon Peter today. For Simon Peter, this is a pivotal moment. It's when it all clicks into place. It's when the who of who Jesus is falls into place for him. And he responds, he says, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Peter nails it. He gets the answer spot on. The penny has just dropped for Peter. He gets it. He suddenly realizes who is truly standing before him. That Jesus is not just a continuation, that he's not just a signpost to the Messiah, that he's not just some guy, another one of the prophets. Jesus is the guy. Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of the living God. I wonder if you've ever had a penny drop moment like that. I wonder if you've had a moment where it all seems to click into place, where everything you was swirling around your head suddenly becomes clear. And the answer to that question of who do you say that I am becomes clear. For me, this happened when I was about, I can think back to a moment when I was about 11 or 12. And when I was 11, so I grew up going to church. My mum would always take me to church. And when I was younger, I didn't really enjoy it that much. I just went because it was what we did, right? But for me, there was a moment when I was about 11 or 12. We went to this event called Easter People. And it was a little bit like New Wine or Spring Harvest or Soul Survivor. It was this like Christian festival where they had these venues for the different age groups. And so I was in the 11 to 14s venue, and suddenly I was surrounded by young people my age, and it was in the worship. I remember on the penultimate night, I was in the worship, and as I was worshiping, I just encountered Jesus in a way that I'd never done so before. And it was this moment where it all clicked into place, where I realized that all this stuff that I had known was true, and that I knew who Jesus was in that moment. And so for me, what happened is I suddenly found myself like, I had tears like rolling down my cheeks. And yet I was kind of like chuckling inside, like I couldn't quite explain it. And it was this very strange emotional sensation that was like just bizarre. And I remember coming out of this event to my mum and kind of trying to explain it to her. And she's, you said, you've encountered Jesus, you've met with God, you've been filled with the Holy Spirit, and trying to explain that to me. But for me, this was the moment. This was the moment where things started to click, where the answer to that question, who do you say that I am, seemed to fall into place for me. So who do you say that I am? That is the question. Who do you understand Jesus to be? And how has that understanding shifted as you've journeyed and you've walked with him? We know that this is a special moment for the disciples, and particularly for Peter, because of the way that Jesus responds to his declaration. Jesus responds, and in verse 17 he says this, Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven." Simon Peter has this revelation moment. It's not just something he's thought, it's something that God has revealed to him. And have you noticed how at the start of that, in verse 17, if we could have it on the screen, that'd be great. He says, Simon, son of Jonah. Simon, son of Jonah. But later on, he calls him Peter. We're going to circle back to that in a bit. So Simon Peter understands the who Jesus is in a whole new way. This isn't just a surface level understanding of the person in front of him, but this is a deep, God-given revelation of who Jesus is. So Jesus continues. He says in verse 18, "And I tell you that you are Peter." So he switches from calling him Simon. So you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. So scholars have two arguments of the way that Jesus is phrasing this, right? So Simon is the name that Simon Peter was born with, but you may or may not know the story, but when Jesus calls Simon Peter, he says, no, you're going to be called Peter now. You're going to be called Peter, which means Petros. It means rock. So Jesus gives him this new name. So there's two theories here. One argument is that scholars think when Jesus says, "On this rock I will build my church," he means you, Peter. Peter, on this rock I will build my church. You are Peter, you are the rock. And it's a foreshadowing of what Peter will become, that Peter will lead the church, and that Peter will be the first like leader in the new church when Jesus dies and rises again. But there is another argument. There is another argument that when Jesus says this rock, he is talking about Peter's confession of faith. He is talking about the declaration that Peter has just uttered, that declaration of who Jesus is. On that rock, that is what I will build my church. The rock on which we build our faith is an understanding of who Jesus is. The rock on which we build our lives is based on that understanding of who Jesus is. It's not just a superficial, surface-level understanding, but this deep, God-given revelation that Jesus is the Messiah, that he is everything he says he is. He's not just the Son of the living God, but God living and active in our world. That is the rock. And it's that kind of confession of faith. It's on that Jesus is going to build his church. It's on that understanding of who Jesus is that this whole crazy God movement begins. And then you know what Jesus says? The gates of Hades will not overcome it. He's saying it's on that is unstoppable. That is unstoppable. That confession of faith is solid rock. That's what, we can do something with that. We can build something on that. We can start a movement on that. And you know, the gates of Hades, like hell is not going to come and stop you. Nothing can stand in your way with that kind of rock. And maybe you're sitting there thinking, I've never really had that kind of penny drop moment. Yes, I know who Jesus is, but I've never really had that pivotal moment like Simon Peter where it all seems to click and it all seems to fall into place. That moment where the journey begins. For me, it was that moment aged 11 or 12. I wonder what it was for you. Maybe you've still not had that moment yet, and that's okay. We're all on a journey. That's what we see right here with the disciples. They've journeyed so far with Jesus before Peter says this confession and has this moment. But if you have had that penny drop moment, I wonder what it was for you. Perhaps it wasn't a single moment. Perhaps it's been a series of moments, a journey, a bunch of different events leading up to that point. But regardless, there is a point where you hit rock, where you go from this superficial understanding of who Jesus is to this understanding of the identity of Jesus that is deep, that is a revelation, that he is the Messiah, the Son of the living God. This deeper understanding of who he is. It's a little bit like when people discover that Peter Parker is actually Spider-Man, right? This moment of like, oh my goodness, I did not see this coming. I didn't realize this was how deep this went. That's the rock. That's the rock that Jesus is talking about in this passage. And it's a bit like that quote from C.S. Lewis. If Christianity is of no importance, if it's false, it's of no importance. If it's true, it's infinitely important. But we can't be indifferent. It's not moderately important. I just want to finish by circling in again on the character of Simon Peter, because I think it's really interesting. So that's the understanding on which we have our faith. That's the rock, right? It's on that understanding of who Jesus is that we build everything. But what about those moments when things aren't so great? What about those moments when we can't quite see so clearly who Jesus is? You know, if those pivotal moments are the mountaintops, what about when we're down in the valleys, when we're feeling not so great about our faith and how things are? When you're not at, Soul Survivor or Easter People, as it was for me, when you're not at those events. In the last year, we have not really even been able to gather together as youth or as church, let alone go to events like Soul Survivor, where we know our faith is really built upon. So what about those times? What I love about Simon Peter is that for the same amount of times he gets it right, he also completely stuffs up and completely gets it wrong. He is most certainly my favorite disciple. And have you ever noticed he's called Simon and Peter kind of interchangeably? Sometimes he's called Simon, sometimes he's called Peter. And I think this gives us an insight into what is going on in the passage. So Peter gives him this new name, right? Jesus comes along and he finds Simon, this fisherman, by the shores. And he says, no, I'm going to give you a new name, a new calling. You're going to be Peter and you will fish for men. You're no longer going to fish for fish. You're going to fish for men. Can you imagine what you'd have been thinking if you were Simon Peter in that position? Like, okay, weirdo. All right. So Simon is this fisherman. Jesus says, follow me. Simon drops everything. And Jesus says, you will be called Peter. Peter means rock. Jesus gives Peter a new name, a new purpose, a new calling, a whole new identity. And so in this passage, there's this really subtle thing where he starts off by calling him Simon. In verse 17, he says, Simon, son of Jonah. And then he says, you are Peter. He says, but you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. It's almost like Jesus is affirming that calling and that identity. Simon is everything that is his old life, right? Everything is his old way of doing things, who he was before he met Jesus. But Peter is the rock, right? Peter is the rock. Peter is everything he should be, everything he's going to be, everything that God has called him to be, this new identity that God has called him and Jesus has called him into. So what I love about Peter is that he is not perfect. He has this revelation moment here, this pivotal moment where he says, yes, Jesus, I see who you are. I get it. I finally get it. You are the Messiah. You are the Son of the living God. He has this pivotal moment. But that doesn't mean that he is perfect from that point forward. It doesn't mean that he's perfect from that moment that things click into place, because he still continues to stuff up after that point of kind of confessing that Jesus is God, right? He still continues to stuff up. Here is probably the best example. And this is one we might be slightly familiar with at the moment because it's very Easter related, right? Jesus is led to the cross, and Peter is asked by 3 different people 3 times, hey, do you know this guy? And he says, no, I don't know him. No, I've never met him. Peter denies any kind of association with Jesus. So then after the resurrection, right, he stuffs up in that moment. Jesus then comes back and reveals the plan, and they're like, oh, I see, you were going to come back. Okay, it makes sense now. I get it. All right. Where do we find the disciples at that point? Once Jesus has died, once he's risen again, they know that he's the Messiah. They know he's the Son of the living God. And they know that that was the plan all along. Where do you think we find the disciples? You know, Peter, this great leader who's going to lead the church, this new movement, this whole new Jesus movement that's going to change the world. Where do we find Peter? In John chapter 21, we find Simon Peter has gone fishing. Simon Peter has gone fishing. It's almost like in that moment, he is reverted all the way back to who he was before Jesus called him. He could not be more Simon in that moment. He is completely back in his comfort zone. He's doing everything he knew before he met Jesus, before that new identity, before that pivotal moment that we find in our passage today. He is back in the fishing boat. It's like he's forgotten everything. He's forgotten that whole journey. But how does Jesus respond? Maybe that I'd encourage you when you get home, go and look at John chapter 21. It's an incredible story of, and we see the same thing again where Jesus starts by saying, Simon, do you love me? Simon. He calls him Simon and then affirms him as Peter. Peter. How does Jesus respond? He forgives Peter. He accepts Peter. He offers Peter more grace again and love again and again and again. There is always room for more grace. There is always room for more grace. I want to tell you a little story just to finish, and then we're going to pray and we're going to see what God wants to do. There was a time when I was in my first or second year of university, and I'd found stuff really hard. Like, it was one of those moments where, you know, I'd had a really just like naff year, and I was just feeling really flat, and that confession of faith that we talked about, that pivotal moment, felt a long way away. It felt like a long time ago. It didn't feel particularly great, right? And I was at this event, I was at Spring Harvest, I think it was, with my old church's youth group, and I was volunteering in the youth group. And I remember being in the worship of that event, and in the worship, God came and met with me, and I was filled with the Holy Spirit, which wasn't anything new at that point, right? That wasn't anything that threw me, but what did throw me is the way in which God met with me. And as I was worshiping, I suddenly had tears rolling down my cheeks, and I had this weird chuckle inside, and I almost can't describe it to you, but it was most certainly the exact same way that God had met with me all those years ago, as I described earlier. God came and met with me in the exact same way. I encountered God, and I can't quite describe how similar they feel. It was almost like, you know, when you kind of walk into someone and you get a smell and suddenly it takes you back and you're remembering something you smelt when you were really small, or, you know, that kind of nostalgia thing. It was kind of one of those moments, but like 10 times more. Like suddenly I was back in that room again, encountering God for the very, very first time. And it was just unreal. And what God was saying to me was, he was reminding me of where we started. He was reminding me of that pivotal moment, that penny drop moment, that moment where our journey together truly began. And he was reminding me of all the journey we'd had together. And I think that's similar here, what we see with Simon Peter. Like, all the times he stuffs up, God offers more grace. He offers a new opportunity. It doesn't matter if we've walked away from where God had us. It doesn't matter if we walk back to being more like Simon than Peter, than the person he calls us to be. It doesn't matter who we are. It doesn't matter what we've done. It doesn't matter how much we're beginning to look like Simon in the fisher boat again. It doesn't matter if we're feeling disconnected, if we're feeling like this year has just been naff, if we're feeling like this year we've not just like stagnated in our faith, but we've gone backwards in our faith. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. This isn't meant to be a one-time offer, right? This isn't meant to be, okay, you want to become a Christian? Great. You're going to have this moment where you need to realize who Jesus is, and that's it. That's the moment. Sorry, you're on your own from there. That's not the point. That's not what it's about. God's love and God's grace goes on and on and on and on. But it starts with an understanding of who Jesus is. It's on that understanding of who Jesus is that we start out on this adventure. But it's by God's grace that we keep going. It's by God's love and his grace that even when we stuff up, even when we stumble, we keep going. All right, let's respond.